Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about my hardscape layout behind me. The tank itself is an ADA 60F aquarium, so it's quite a small tank. It only holds about 32 litres. But we're going to be talking about the concept of the hardscape layout and a bit about how it was constructed, how I managed to get this idea from the idea in my head all the way through to the hardscape. The bit that comes next is probably the planting and the filling and all this kind of stuff, but we won't put that in this video. We'll leave that for another video in the future. The hardscape design features many paths. The idea of this hardscape layout, at the beginning, I first of all knew that I wanted to create some sort of depth in an aquascape, and I wanted to use a lot of serrated rock because I had plenty. I wanted to bank up the substrate really high. I didn't want to use too many plants, mostly maybe mosses or something, or low-growing plants, carpeting plants. But I wanted to create a layout that had a lot of impact and that showed a wee bit of thought that went into the hardscape design. So what I started with is this idea that I wanted this serrated rock, like mountainous scape with like paths. That was as far as the idea went. There wasn't a sketch or anything done previously. I then placed some towels in the tank. And this was just to allow me to, maybe the towels basically served as like a soil layer so that I could then put the rocks in the tank and start to get an idea for what would look good and what I was going for. So I started placing rocks in different places of on this towel in the tank. This allowed me to get a rough layout, a rough concept idea of what I wanted. And then later down the road, a few days later, I actually sketched on, just with like, I don't know, on my phone, like these lines like for sand, just to get an idea of what the paths would look like, to see if I kind of liked that. It was just a really rough image. I didn't take a lot of time over it, but it gave me an idea of what I was going for. And I liked that idea, so I proceeded with it. The next step would just be to obviously remove all the hardscape, but before doing so, don't forget to take a picture. If you're doing this in like a dojo, like a sandbox in an aquascaping store, make sure you take a picture before you leave the store, or if you're doing it on your floor, make sure you take a picture of the hardscape layout, because you'll forget and it'll never look the same. Although this layout, as it stands right now, it doesn't look the same as the concept, but it's very close, and taking that picture allowed me to actually get as close as possible to the concept design. In addition to the photo, it might actually be useful to take a photo from different angles or even a little video, because then you'll know which rock goes where. That's actually quite a good tip when you're actually coming to do the layout from having the concept before. The first thing I did was put a layer of lava rock down. There's a few things this does. It's really good for beneficial bacteria because it allows water movement through the bottom layers of the substrate. And also it forms like a bit of a structure underneath the hardscape so that the soil doesn't slide all to the front. It still did this when I was putting the hardscape in a bit, but it actually does help quite a lot by using this lava rock based base underneath the soil, because it does create a bit of stability for the hardscape. On top of the lava rock, I poured in the soil. I was using the ADA Amazonia, just the version 1. So that went on top, and then what I did was I was using these little polystyrene blocks, cutting them up into little squares, and I used these to sit the rocks upon them because the rocks are quite big and the glass isn't as thick, you know, so they're quite heavy, and if I just put like a pressure point on the glass of the rock, it might be more at risk of cracking. It probably wouldn't, but just to be on the safe side, to give it a bit more stability, I put these little polystyrene blocks down, and it also allowed me to move it about a bit more and keep the rocks in place as well. I also used tiny little bits of packaging, like I guess it's like foam packaging, just along the glass while I was working on the hardscape. It was removed afterwards, but it was just in case the rock went and like fell and scratched the glass. Normally I start by placing the biggest rock, and that's what I did here. It is a substantial rock for a tank like this. It doesn't maybe look like one big rock, but it actually is. It follows this line up here on the left hand side of the tank, and I knew that this would work really well for like defining a path edge. So it got placed there. It got moved later as the scape progressed to find its best position, But at the start I was just trying to get rocks in just to roughly look like the concept. And then I started placing the bigger rocks in place to try and get that kind of look and feel I got in my concept design. And then followed by that, the smaller and the smaller rocks start to get added. And then I started to try and move the rocks in a way that I would get this kind of like winding path effect. So on the right here, you can see the path kind of winds. If it's just a straight path, it doesn't look quite right. It doesn't look very appealing and it's not very natural. So there is a thought behind all the paths in this layout. This one on the right here is my main focal point. So this path, as you can see, it winds, but at the very end of the path, you can see the end of the path, or you can kind of see where the end of the path is going. At least it kind of flows round and goes through to the back right of the tank. And you can see that path, but the other paths you can't quite make out. This path down the center left here, this path you can't actually see, it only maybe goes halfway. And it's kind of blocked by this it's obstructed by this big rock here. And that's really important because if I made that path go down to the back and you see where it ended basically, it would also look like a focal point. And I kind of wanted to draw my attention to the one focal point in this layout, which would be the path on the right. I've added a few other small paths and they're not the focal points because they're much smaller. So you can see one on the very, very far right here, a little tiny path that goes up the rocks. There's also a path in the center here that kind of joins onto the main path, but it is an individual path itself. And then there's also one on the left here, which has a little split at the start. So I suppose you can kind of see where this one ends, but it still doesn't have the same effect as the path at the back right there. When I was constructing the hardscape and the concept, as well as actually putting it in the tank when I was doing it for real, I paid close attention to the strata lines. So as you can see on this path and these rocks here, they all follow the left. They all go left in the same like sort of angle. All the little strata lines on the rocks itself follow the same direction as the other rocks. Of course, there are some rocks that don't go in the same direction, and this does create a bit of contrast, a bit of conflict, which is kind of nice. So use that sparingly and use your own judgment. If it looks natural or if it just looks odd, then maybe don't use it. But of course that could work too. As you can see in the center here, most of the rocks do follow the same direction. Now there are some rocks, especially maybe this one at the back right here, the back right of this path, or the central section. It does follow the same line as the rocks on the right, and that sort of creates a conflict between this section and this section, which is kind of nice. As well as using the polystyrene blocks in some places, I've used some filter wool. I don't really like to use filter wool all that much, but sometimes it can't be avoided. So I've used the filter wool in some sections just to hold back the soil from spilling onto the front. I find that really, really useful in some scenarios, and especially like a layout such as this, you will struggle to avoid using things such as filter wool, glue and things like this, so sometimes it is needed. Underneath some of the big rocks, there are some smaller stones to add stability, and also to kind of add a bit of, you get stones that support big rocks, and they also add a bit of visual stability as well as adding the stability itself. The rocks don't necessarily have to add structural stability, but sometimes they do add visual stability. So you'll see in nature a rock falling over like this, and there'll be a stone underneath it. That little rock under here adds visual stability. It looks like it holds this up. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it does add a bit of visual stability, and it really looks natural. It looks right. So a little tip to add there. You can see maybe some of this big rock on the right here. We've got some smaller stones down the side of the path. They do add a bit of visual stability, as in the rock would just slip in nature if there wasn't some rocks going down the side of it. So I think that's really important, as well as down the path here. Some of the little rocks in between the path hold these big rocks from falling down as well. So that's a really important tip there as well. One thing to note on the left here, we've got a little rock that kind of divides the path. This was a tip I think I took from Mech Aquascaping, I believe it is. I saw it a while ago on one of his layouts, and he had like a little tiny stone that divided a path, and it had a little tiny grassy bits around it. I haven't used the same thing as him, but it kind of follows that same idea where it splits the path. Sometimes I do take inspiration from other aquascapes I see, not all the time, and most of it's just my own ideas or something I've seen in nature or something like this. But little tips like that, placing a rock that divides a path, I thought it was a really nice element to add to an aquascape. And especially something like this, with so many paths, I need to add different elements to each path. One path has this little split, one this kind of just disappears and you can't really see into the canyon, one it winds up to the top. So adding different elements to the paths and not making them all straight or them all winding to the end is really important because it adds a bit of diversity. Throughout creating the hardscape, I kept adding more and more soil. I kept banking it up higher as I wanted the path to reach a higher level. Behind these big rocks, the soil is banked up very, very high. So I'm going to have to be very careful with the plant choice. Probably only going to go with carpeting plants or moss or something like Ricardia maybe. Let me know in the description actually what you think, what kind of plants you think would work in this layout. Things like low growing plants would work really well. I will be adding CO2 and it will have as much light as is needed for the plants. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, what plants you would like to see in this layout. After the soil was all in, I made sure that the soil wasn't coming to the front of the glass here, moved it back with a little sand flattener, and then I added a layer of gravel on top of the sand, the soil, sorry. So this layer of gravel, as well as adding a bit of a visual appeal at the sides, it also created a barrier between the soil and the sand I'm going to put on later. It stops the sand and the gravel, the sand and the soil from mixing too much. I don't mind the sand and the gravel mixing a tiny touch, but the soil, once the soil gets onto the sand, it can be a real pain to clean up. So this was a good little thing I found that was quite helpful, especially in this layout. After that, I obviously added the sand. The sand winded down the paths. Once after adding the sand, this will obviously cover the majority of the gravel you added. So you'll have to then go back and add the little details of the gravel around the edges of the path or any areas that you think look good. So I did that, and I made sure to keep the layer of sand and gravel at the front of the glass, this layer right down here, very, very shallow. Because the tank's so shallow, if I added a lot of sand, a big thick layer of sand, I would lose quite a lot of room top to bottom, and it would lose that kind of perspective as well. So it's a good little tip. It's only cosmetic sand, and it's called cosmetic sand for a reason. So you don't actually need a lot. You only really need enough to cover the glass. So don't waste your money. Use as little as you possibly can. One little quick tip is using super glue on paths. I don't quite like using super glue as it leaves a bit of a stain on rocks and hardscape, but in this case I thought it would be useful. So I put super glue on the actual path itself, down this little tiny path, and then I sprinkled some more sand on top of the super glue. And what this did is it sort of created a harder surface so the sand path doesn't all slide back down. In this sort of like a scenario, it worked really, really well. I forgot to mention the actual materials I'm using here, although it doesn't matter as much as the concept. I think the concept's far more important than the materials, but the rock here is celery rock. It's a very, very popular rock. It does raise the hardness of the water, so yeah, it's just something I'm gonna have to deal with. It is what it is. So yeah, but the sand here is 88 La Plata sand. I actually reused it from the previous scape. I removed all the sand, I cleaned it up with water, I laid it out, I let it dry, and removed all the little soil granules. It was quite a procedure, but to save a little bit of cash, and there was nothing wrong with the sand at all, I did so. The gravel here, I can't exactly remember the name of it, but it is from Dennerle. By the way, none of this is sponsored. None of these products are sponsored. It's simply just products I bought myself. The gravel here is from Dennerle. I quite like what Dennerle do with their gravels. They give like 2 different sizes of each type of gravel, which is kind of neat if you want to create a bit more of a mixing effect and a gradient effect. But I found that this one actually matches the celery rock quite well, and I think it really, really works well in this kind of like landscape, rocky landscape kind of a visual effect. So that's it guys, that's the whole hardscape concept and design. I hope you really enjoyed the video. Don't forget to let me know in the comments what kind of plants you would like to see in the scape. It has to be low growing. I know on my Instagram page, some people have let me know what plants they think would work. So I'll have to go through them and pick what works and mix and match and find what works for me. But once again, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Subscribing really helps a small channel like mine. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye-bye.